And maybe that's feasible on the scale of 1 to 10 drones. But once you're scaling up to 100 or 1,000 drones, that becomes a really unmanageable process unless you have a tool behind it.
You're listening to the Drone Radio Show podcast, the show about drones and the people who use them for business, fun, and research. Hosted by Randy Goers.
Hello, everyone. This is Randy Goers, and welcome to the Drone Radio Show podcast, episode 89. Do you have an idea for a new drone startup? Then the lessons offered by today's guests will really interest you. Siggi Hindrichs is an entrepreneur in residence at the Samsung Next Start Tech Accelerator in San Francisco. She is the founder of Notifleet, an early-stage startup that aims to be an all-in-one solution for fleet management for commercial UAVs. Siggi is also a certified remote pilot with sUAS rating under Part 107. In this episode, Siggi talks about her business idea to help companies scale their drone fleets, the benefits and opportunities of working in a tech accelerator, and the challenges and rewards of creating a new tech startup. If you have an idea for a new drone business, you'll find this interview fascinating. Let's pick up the interview where I asked Siggi to introduce herself.
My name is Siggi Hindrichs, and I'm an entrepreneur in residence at the Samsung Next Start Accelerator in San Francisco. And I spend my time evaluating business opportunities in the drone space. And I'm especially interested in opportunities that have to do with using software to make it easier for companies to operate in the current regulatory environment.
Tell us about the Samsung Next Accelerator. What's its role?
So I'm funded and supported by Samsung Next Start, which is a tech accelerator. And they do a lot of things, but most importantly, they make investments in early stage technology companies. And they hire entrepreneurs in residence like me to work on their even earlier stage business ventures and to provide industry-related knowledge when we have it. And then they also just offer a space and a community for all of those people to interact and support each other.
How did you get into the accelerator?
Samsung and I were a good match. I was looking for funding and space and advising, and they were looking for someone with a legal background to get into the drone space, which is, as you know, a heavily regulated industry and has implications for a number of different types of law, like administrative or regulatory, intellectual property, federal preemption. The list kind of goes on and on. There are so many legal implications. I'd say the experience at the accelerator has been really great so far. It's a nice mix of being independent and acting as an independent company and having the support of other companies around you.
Tell us about your background and how it led to drones.
I studied finance in undergrad, and I actually went on to teach middle school math in Boston Public Schools before going to law school. And while I was in law school at Stanford, I took classes in venture capital and computer science and design, and I worked at a financial technology startup along with a venture capital firm and a startup law firm. And I was really interested in the intersection of law and technology and business, which is how I got into drones.
Because you're coming from a legal background into the business accelerator, where did the idea of the drone business come from? Was it your idea or was it from the accelerator standpoint?
It was a collaboration. So I had been affiliated with the accelerator because I knew their general manager through Stanford, and he was looking for someone with a regulatory or legal background to get into drones and dig into the industry. And I found them interesting from the regulatory standpoint. So it was a collaboration on the initial idea, and it's only developed since then.
So basically, they brought you in to explore the legal framework on the operation of drones. And out of that came the idea to create a drone-based business. Yes,
about that. So they brought me in and said, take a look at the drone industry, see what companies are out there, see if there are opportunities specifically related to the complex regulatory environment, and report back.
What did your report say?
It's still very much ongoing. Right now, I'm working on a company that is an all-in-one fleet management tool for enterprise drone fleets. It would make it particularly easy for a company with a drone fleet to understand and comply with regulations and laws at the federal, state, and local level so that they can just focus on flying and making their operations more efficient with drones.
Let's talk a little more about your idea. What's the problem you're trying to solve with this new business?
So imagine that you are a large company that wants to use drones to make your operations more efficient. And let's say that you start out with 100 drones and you eventually scale to 1,000 drones. Now, for any individual drone, right now you need an operator to use it. You need to plan the flight. You need to check the federal, state, and local regulations and laws to make sure that your flight plan is compliant and that you have any necessary permissions. You need to make sure that your pilot is certified either under Part 107 or another regulatory law. Then you need to check battery cycles and lots of other information about individual drones. And maybe that's feasible on the scale of 1 to 10 drones. But once you're scaling up to 100 or 1,000 drones, that becomes a really unmanageable process unless you have a tool behind it. So I was looking to solve that problem.
Are you approaching it through a technology application, a management solution, or through a consulting business practice or something else?
That's a great question. It's a piece of software that would integrate with companies' existing workflows to be an all-in-one management system.
From your research, in terms of the challenges that companies have in managing fleets, what did you learn?
So I'm still finding out that it's very early times for drone fleets. Many companies that can envision using drone fleets are still in the early stages and are dabbling in experimenting and trying to understand how drones can make their operations more efficient or totally change their operations and supplement them. So I found that it's pretty early for drone fleets.
Well, picking up on that, being that it may be early for drone fleets, what do you think companies should be thinking about before adding some drones?
So companies need to understand the value that drones could have when they're integrated into their existing workflows. And that's not going to be true for every industry. But for example, in construction or in building inspection, you can change the way that individual workers complete their existing processes. So for example, instead of climbing up on top of a roof using a ladder, you can send a drone up and it takes less time and is a lot safer. And that's just in insurance. Drones are going to add efficiencies to existing businesses, but we're still trying to figure out exactly what all of those are. And so companies are really experimenting still, and they're waiting for the use cases to be proven to them.
So you hope your tool is going to make it easier for a company to get started?
Yes, exactly.
Now, most people hear about startups about the time they've launched, but you're not even at that stage. Can you talk about where you are in that process?
I started out by doing a lot of learning about the drone industry. I spent a month just learning, reading the regulations, understanding who the existing players are. Then I made some hypotheses about what I think the existing needs in the industry are, what companies need to be better supported, what industry end users are looking for. And then I went out and talked to customers. And I'm still very much doing that. I have a long list of potential companies and customers that are either already experimenting with drones or using drones, or who I think will in the next 5 to 10 years, or 1 to 5 years. And now I think it's very important to just get ideas and early prototypes out in front of customers so that I can get feedback about what their actual pain points are and tailor the initial product to them.
So you're in the idea testing stage right now?
Exactly.
And how long before you're ready to develop a prototype?
I'm moving into developing a minimum viable product now, the MVP prototype, so that I can take it back out to customers who did show interest and get their feedback on the first few sets of features and understand what their priorities are, what has to happen first, what systems does it have to integrate with. The more information that they can give me, the better I can develop the product. It's also possible that we find that the need doesn't exist and that we back away from this idea entirely. It's better to fail fast and learn that lesson before investing tons of resources.
Have you had any setbacks along the way?
I haven't had setbacks, but I've definitely had a lot of bad ideas. I spent the first few weeks, as I said, just learning. And in doing that, I also came up with a lot of ideas of possible products in the drone industry, possible supports for existing companies. And many of them were just bad ideas. But it's important to have lots of bad ideas because among them are good ideas.
Is this a sole business plan, or are you part of a team that's working together on this particular project?
Right now I'm working alone, and then once I have a clear vision for the product, I'll start hiring on.
What have been some of the advantages of working in the Samsung Next Tech accelerator?
Being an entrepreneur in the early stages of a company is challenging for a lot of reasons. In particular, you don't have the accountability of a team around you. You don't have many opportunities to get feedback on your work quickly. And frankly, it doesn't make sense to get office space for one or two people. But at the accelerator, I meet with my advisors usually once a week to get their input and their pushback. And I'm surrounded by other entrepreneurs and other small teams who are excited about their own projects, but who are willing to offer feedback and advice and accountability, and we can support each other in that way. At the same time, I'm not acting like a product manager at someone else's company, so ultimately I still get the independence and make decisions about my own company. We also have a really beautiful view of the San Francisco Bay here, so it's pretty hard to complain.
Yeah, that's not too bad. Is this your first effort as an entrepreneur?
Yes, I have worked at another person's startup before, and I've worked at a startup law firm, and I've worked at a venture capital firm, but this is my first independent venture.
For someone with an idea for a drone-based business, what advice can you offer to get them off on the right step?
I'd say the biggest thing is to get it out in front of other people. If you can build a prototype, even if it's simple, even if it's worse than you imagine your product being, make it and get it out in front of other people quickly. You might think that certain needs exist, and they might, but people may not be willing to pay for them, or your hypotheses could be wrong. As an entrepreneur, I've learned that you're going to make mistakes and there isn't a right answer, but testing your product and your hypotheses and getting out in front of other people before you invest too many resources is probably the best advice I can give to anybody with a new idea.
All too often, people are hesitant to share their ideas out of fear that they'll be taken. What do you say to that?
I understand that fear. It's a really common misconception in entrepreneurship. In Silicon Valley, people say ideas are not worth a lot. It's about team, it's about execution. And if you come to see an investor in Silicon Valley, if you asked them to sign a non-disclosure agreement so that they wouldn't share your idea with anyone, they might laugh at you. It's really about the execution and the carrying out of the idea. Ideas are worth very little on their own, unfortunately.
Getting back to your legal background, you did a lot of research on the legal use of drones. What stands out most to you in regard to federal, state, and local drone regulations?
I would say that in general, the federal laws, in particular for small UAS under Part 107, they're easy to learn about and they're easy to stay compliant with. It used to be the case that commercial flight for small UAS was by default illegal, and you had to seek a legal exemption to be able to fly commercially. But after Part 107 went into effect this summer, it became a lot easier for a commercial pilot to operate. Basically, you take the test and then you make sure independently that you can fly safely. The regulations are still very restrictive. For example, you can't fly at night, you can't fly beyond line of sight, but by and large, they've gotten a lot more permissive. And I think and hope that as the FAA sees how safely certain technologies can be operated, the rules will get more permissive. We're in a little bit of a bind, though, because the FAA rightfully wants data, and it wants evidence to prove that certain flight operations are safe. But you need to be able to conduct certain flight operations to prove that they're safe. So we're in a bind. As far as state and local laws and ordinances go, they're in flux. They're changing. Some will stick around and others will be found to be unenforceable or will be wholly preempted by the federal government or by their state.
In your research, did you find anything that really surprised you in terms of any of the requirements or what was happening?
I wasn't surprised by any of the particular requirements, not at the federal level at least, but I was surprised that there wasn't a clear source for the local laws or for many of the state laws. So for the federal laws, there are many apps that are trying to help you understand airspace and where you can fly, and the FAA has online information about it. And for the states, there are a few organizations that track state laws. But there's very little centralization with respect to the local rules and laws. So it's actually hard to find out local rules about where and how you can fly. I was kind of amused, maybe not surprised, but amused by some of the contradiction in some of the state laws. Some of the state laws are intended to protect hunters. For example, they say you can't use a drone to harass or follow hunters or fishers. But other state laws say you can't use drones to hunt. And so they're almost exactly the opposite.
What I typically see at the local level are regulations that try to establish some peace of mind by inserting restrictions that can be enforced by their own police departments. It gives them a sense of local control. But I think it creates some confusion for drone operators when they have to be aware of the various levels of regulation.
Yeah, that's consistent with what I'm seeing. I think it will take a couple years to figure out exactly what the states and localities can rule on and what will be left at the federal level.
Now, you're a drone pilot yourself, right?
I am. I'm 107 certified.
And when did you get your Part 107?
I got it pretty early on in October.
So from your perspective, what was the test like?
I had spent time reading the FAA's information about Part 107 as part of my learning about the industry. And so I decided to take the test to understand what people who wanted to be commercial pilots go through to get appropriately licensed, and also what needs that creates for companies that employ those commercial pilots. I don't actually need a Part 107 certification in my own job because I don't fly commercially. So for me, it was really about understanding what the FAA wants remote pilots to know and why they want them to know that information. So I studied pretty seriously, and because I studied seriously, the test was very easy.
This is interesting because since you didn't need the Part 107, in essence, it was like you were auditing the process. So what can you tell us about that process? How do we get through it as best possible?
I would say identify your purpose for taking it. So like you said, I was taking it really from an auditor's perspective. So I spent a lot of time studying. I started studying about 2 weeks before I took the test, and I read the FAA summary materials about Part 107, and I took an online prep course, which I thought was very clear and very informative. But it was also expensive. And so if you're cash strapped, you don't need to take an online course to learn the material. There's a lot of good free information online. In general, I would say take the test seriously and you'll pass with no problem. And then once you pass, find the tools you need to fly in line with the regulations. Passing the test does not make you a good pilot, so get real flight experience before offering your services commercially. I, for example, know a lot about the regulations, and I'm good at reading sectional charts, but I would not recommend hiring me to be your commercial remote pilot.
Have you done much flying with your drone?
I'm relatively new to it. I had RC cars as a kid, but no RC helicopters. Where I am in Silicon Valley, you get a lot of exposure to new technologies. So before I started this venture, I thought drones were cool, but I didn't know much about them, and I definitely hadn't flown one. Now I've flown a Phantom 4, and I have a little Sima X5C. The Phantom is really easy to fly and was really wonderful to play with. And the Sima required a bit more experience in trimming. I also recently tested out the Hover Passport, which is a little selfie drone. That was a lot of fun. And I'm really hoping to fly the Mavic soon since I've heard such good things.
Have you always had an interest in technology? Or did this move to technology happen because you had an interest in entrepreneurism?
I have been interested in technology for a long time. I think in particular, I don't have a technical background as an engineer, but I've been looking for other ways to get involved in technology and in STEM more generally. I think that technology and entrepreneurship, particularly in California, go hand in hand, which has been a nice fit. I came out here for law school and understood that this would be a really interesting intersection of law and technology and business. I think it's a great place where you can continue learning forever, and that's really appealing to me.
As a woman, did you encounter any resistance or unusual hurdles in what is considered a predominantly male industry?
I think at this point, while there are systemic barriers for women in technology and in the workforce generally, I haven't experienced any in this job. I feel very supported, and maybe one of the greatest advantages is I'm my own boss, and so sexism in the workplace doesn't get in my way too easily. In drones, most of my contacts have been men. That hasn't been a challenge for me, I don't think. But I also look up to a lot of the really great women in leadership in drones. I'm a big fan of Lisa Ellman and Gretchen West and Sally French. There are a lot of really great examples who are thankfully very visible in the industry.
Getting back to your business idea, is there anything about the business that we didn't touch upon that we should talk about?
Well, I guess if it's appropriate, I'm always looking for industry input. So if there are listeners who have companies that are looking to scale their drone operations, I want to talk to them, and they should feel free to reach out to me.
What would be some of the key questions that you would like people to respond or react to?
I would love to hear what they think scale looks like in their operations and what supports and features they need specifically or envision needing in the next year or so.
And the name of your application is?
I like to call it Notifleet, Notifleet, and you can find us at notifleet.com.
What's this whole process been like for you personally in terms of trying to start this business in this industry?
Well, I think starting any new company is challenging. And it's challenging because you experience a lot of ups and downs, and there's so much risk, and you hold all of those ups and downs. So I sit with the idea that most startups fail every day, and I think about how I can make mine different. Starting a company that has to do with UAVs in particular, I think is especially challenging because I'm working on a product in an industry that isn't totally defined yet. And I'm trying to suss out a relatively new customer pain point. It's one thing to say to a customer or potential customer, I know you have this problem and I'm here to solve it. And it's another thing to say, I think you might have this problem. Is that right? If so, I'm here to solve it.
That's definitely a big challenge.
Mm-hmm.
So what's the next steps for you?
My next steps are to do a bit more customer research, get out in front of more customers, hear about their needs. My prototype is on its way, and that will help me in my customer development process.
What's the end game for all of this? What do you hope the process eventually brings you?
I guess generally or broadly, I plan to have a successful drone business that understands and addresses the real needs of the commercial customers out there, and I hope to learn a lot in the process. And I understand that it may take different shape and different form as it evolves.
That's it for episode 89 of the Drone Radio Show. I hope you enjoyed listening to Siggi Hindrichs and learning about her efforts to launch Notifleet. I want to thank Siggi for sharing her story and expertise. If you want more information about Notifleet or want to connect with Siggi, check out the website at notifleet.com. If you want information on Samsung's Next Tech Accelerator, that website is samsungnext.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a positive review on iTunes. It really does help. And thanks for listening. And I hope you'll download more episodes of the Drone Radio Show podcast to hear how others are using drones for business, fun, and research. For the Drone Radio Show, I'm Randy Gores.
This has been the Drone Radio Show podcast. More information on today's show can be found on our website at www.droneradioshow.com. If you're using drone technology for business, fun, or research, and would like to share your experience on the show, please visit our website and fill out a guest appearance application. And don't forget to follow us on your favorite social media channels.